Hello and welcome back to another edition of Viper Bites Sunday Night Football preview. We've got the 6-2 Tennessee Titans heading to Hollywood to face off against the 7-1 Los Angeles Rams. But before we get any further into the Sunday Night Football preview, please take a minute. And if you're watching on the Vipers YouTube network, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe today. I'll wait. If you're listening to the show on any of our podcasting platforms, whether it be Apple or Spotify, Anchor, or any other, please make sure you take an opportunity to rate and review the show. It's always appreciated. And if you have any questions, drop them in the comments and hit me up on Twitter at Matt Donnelly FF. It's right there on the screen. And I'll be sure to get back to you with an answer. And like I said, let's get into those stacks and facts for this Sunday Night Football preview. And let's head to the Tennessee side here first, where we got to address the elephant in the room, or lack of elephant, Derrick Henry. He's going to be missing some time, about 6 to 8 weeks, probably closer to 8 weeks with that foot injury. He's going to have that surgery, or he's already had the surgery, but it's going to take him out for a little while. They went out and they signed Adrian Peterson to kind of help bring that backfield together with Jeremy McNichols. We'll see how that goes a little bit further. We'll talk about it here in just a minute. But first, we have to talk about Ryan Tannehill. He is now the captain of the backfield. Okay, maybe not. Both Henry going to miss that time. Ryan Tannehill leads the Titans in rushing with 167 yards and now has a team-high 3 rushing touchdowns. More on this rushing game in a moment. It's not like Tannehill can't throw the ball either. He and A.J. Brown have been running it back to 2020 the last couple weeks, and Tannehill has thrown for the 8th most passing yards so far. That's 2002 if you're keeping track, if you're looking at those numbers right now. 2002 passing yards, while moving all the way up to QB 11 on the season with 143.58 fantasy points. Despite the slower start to the season that had many of us kind of questioning, why did we draft Tannehill as our QB2? Some of us who were waiting on quarterbacks took him as a QB1, and now he has turned back into a top 10 option since week 5. The Rams have been opportunistic this year with 11 interceptions, tops in the league, but have actually allowed a lot of passing yards, even more so than what the Titans have, and we'll talk about that later. We like to kick the Titans when they're down as far as their passing defense goes. The Rams have actually given up more passing yards this year, so get your popcorn ready. This is going to be a fun game to watch. Now, talking about that running game, Jeremy McNichols, Adrian Peterson, these guys will be the ones that manning the backfield until the king is ready to return to his throne. Peterson is being activated to the 53-man roster for this one and fits the running game style of the Titans to a T. He loves to run the ball downhill, and he does it very quickly. And that's basically been what the Titans like to do, and that's what Peterson's MO has been doing for his entire career. Look, Peterson, he is just built different. He's like that old appliance your parents still have kicking around, whether that's a washer or dryer or whatever that might be, that it will stand the test of time. Meanwhile, we are replacing our dishwashers, replacing our dryers, replacing our wash machines every other year. Peterson may be an oldie, but he is a goodie, and you can rely on him in this matchup and probably for the rest of the season until Henry comes back. Now, McNichols, he is third on the team in receiving yards with 203 and averages 9.7 yards per reception. Look for this role as a pass catcher to be expanded while Henry is out of the lineup. And he'll probably get a few carries as well. So we'll see how this dynamic unfolds here on Sunday night. But I would expect a good, healthy mix of Peterson in there with McNichols off the get-go. Slight advantage to McNichols just because he's a little bit younger. He's been in the system, but there's not much that Peterson hasn't seen in his career already. So don't worry, Peterson will get his this week. As far as the passing game was going, A.J. Brown is starting to come around. He is now 28th in wide receiver PPR scoring with 104.2, while improving that average per game total to 14.9, which is 25th in the league. Now, in the last 3 games, Brown is the wide receiver 2, posting 74.9 fantasy points. That's 25 fantasy points per game, and trails only Cooper Kupp statistically. Helping pad those numbers are 3 consecutive games with 9 or more targets and 90-plus receiving yards in each of those games, 130 or more in each of the last 2 contests. And without Henry to run this offense through, I'd expect more targets to head both to A.J. Brown and to Julio Jones. A Julio Jones who is healthy for now. Now, remember back in Madden, like in 2012, you try to be the GM, you try and get AP on with Julio on that same squad, that would have been quite the lethal combination. Unfortunately, it's 2021, and Julio's been dealing with some form of an injury in one way, shape, or form or another, what seems to be all season. He's missed 3 games so far and been limited in more than one. And it's showing statistically when you're talking about fantasy, we just can't trust him so far. Now, he has failed to surpass 10 fantasy points in any game, but won this year, and that was way back in week 2 against the Seahawks. The Rams give up the 13th most fantasy points per game to receivers, allowing on average a 36.88 per contest, but have only allowed 5 touchdowns. So while it's been difficult to score on the secondary, they have been able to move the ball in the air. And I think that's something that the Titans could possibly take advantage of, but I need that touchdown production for me to be really believing both A.J. Brown and Julio Jones as wide receiver runs this week. I think A.J. is more of a wide receiver 2 with a lot of ceiling to be a wide receiver 1. I think Julio Jones is more of a wide receiver 3, maybe a flex option. Now, we talk about how you're able to move the ball in the air. It could also make Chester Rogers a sneaky play this week with 4 teams on bye. So if you're desperate and have nothing to lose, hit up Rogers or teammate Nick Westbrook in there, because there's no guarantee that Julio makes it through this game. As far as the tight end position is concerned, Anthony Firkster is only being discussed on here because the Rams have allowed 14.4 fantasy points per game to tight ends. And with Tampa Bay on bye this week, technically that makes Firkster the 10th or 12th friendliest matchup going into this. As for the Rams have conceded the 7th most receiving yards to the position and are giving up 512 passing yards to the tight end in 8 games. Now, let's flip that script a little bit here. Head over and talk about the Los Angeles Rams. And let's start off with Matthew Stafford. This week, he gets to face the Titans defense that has allowed the 5th most passing yards. Remember, the Rams have given up their share of passing yards as well, allowing opposing signal callers to toss it around the field to the tune of 2,268 yards. In Tennessee's defense, they've seen some pretty elite quarterbacks, from Kyler Murray to Russell Wilson to Josh Allen to Patrick Mahomes, even though Mahomes really didn't do a whole heck of a lot in that one game that we saw play there. But those numbers kind of push those things up a little bit. Now, Stafford, he comes in this league 2nd in the league in passing and in passing touchdowns with 2,477 passing yards and 22 touchdowns, trailing only Tom Brady in both those categories. More impressive, his 9.1 yards per attempt is 1st in the league among quarterbacks that have played at least 6 games. And he's been able to do that without Deshaun Jackson, who the Rams just released the other day and who is still looking for a home if anyone's keeping track of that. Now, Darrell Henderson, he has a little bit more of a difficult matchup on the Rams sideline this week. Henderson is facing the 9th-ranked fantasy defense against the running back position, a defense that is only allowing 21.11 fantasy points per game, but have allowed 6 rushing touchdowns to the running back position and 619 rushing yards. Henderson has been a top 6 fantasy back since week 4 while running for 507 yards, which is 8th in the league, and an additional 141 yards in the passing game on the season. In 7 games Henderson has played, he has posted at least 15 fantasy points in each game, with the exception of Week 7's contest against the Detroit Lions. That game got out of hand awfully quick. Henderson wasn't really needed much. Now, when you add that kind of consistency up along with those 7 touchdowns, you end up with an RB1. Right now, he's currently the 11th ranked running back, which puts him into that RB1 category. Now, Cooper Kupp is the real deal. His worst, I'm going to repeat this multiple times. His worst outing came back in week 4 against Arizona, in which he only had 11.4 fantasy points and only had 64 receiving yards, which were both his season lows. I mean, that's still double-digit fantasy points in every single game. He has 90 or more yards in 7, or sorry, let me back this up. He has had 90 or more yards, 7 or more receptions, and 9 or more targets in 7 of 8 games this year. And currently leads all wide receivers in fantasy points with 214 in 8 games and sits 37 points ahead of the next closest receiver, who is Tyreek Hill. And the Titans are the most generous team in giving up 4 more fantasy points per game than the next closest team at a clip of 47.46 fantasy points per game. and are allowing a league high 1,728 receiving yards to the position and the second most touchdowns as well. Yeah, you can fire up Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods and probably Van Jefferson and feel comfortable about it. Now, Robert Woods, we all thought would be a big deal coming this season. I mean, he was the wide receiver 12 last year with Jared Goff under center. And this year, with Matt Stafford coming down, expectations were even higher. Now, while things didn't get off to a good start, rumor is that Matt Stafford and Cooper Kupp have begun inviting Woods to breakfasts and dinners. And it's starting to pay off. Since week 6, Woods is the wide receiver 13. He's got 46.8 fantasy points over that period. That stud, Kupp is still the apple of Stafford's eye, leading the league in that same period of time with 96.1 fantasy points. But we're talking about Woods here. It's not that he's been terrible. He has double-digit fantasy points in PPR in 7 of 8 games, but he also has touchdowns in 3 of the last 5. However, those receiving numbers don't look as good because he's 32nd in the league in receiving with 458 receiving yards, with 150 of those coming against the Seattle Seahawks back in week 5. Maybe it's time for the squeaky wheel to get a little bit of grease. Maybe he needs to make a little bit of noise here heading into this matchup against the Titans. Now, Van Jefferson, he is sitting as the wide receiver 41 in PPR. He has gone 3 games in which he's recorded 80 or more receiving yards. And with Jefferson, he only needs 1 pass to do that. Jefferson has 6 or more targets in 4 of the last 6 games, scoring twice in the last 5 contests. He has been a sneaky flex play, providing your fantasy squads with double-digit scoring in half those games, including 11.8 last week and 14.3 fantasy points the week prior to that. We talk about fantasy disappointments every year, and it seems every year Tyler Higbee's name comes up. Even in great matchups, he hasn't performed. Last week was one of those matchups. Listen, the Texans were a top 5 when it came to allowing points to tight ends, and Higbee walked away from that contest with a modest 5.5 points. In fact, he's been held to less than 10 fantasy points in 6 of 8 contests and hasn't had more than 60 receiving yards since week 1. And yet, because the way the tight end position has been playing out this year and really every other year, somehow, some way, Tyler Higbee through 8 games is the tight end 14. That's not good for the position. It's not good for anything. Tyler Higbee has not been good. Our expectations for him have been too high, and it's time to bring those expectations down a little bit. Now, with 4 teams on a bye this week and some injuries to the position, I can understand why you may feel the need to play Higbee, but temper those expectations because he hasn't been effective at all this season. That said, I'm expecting the Rams to win this game big. I'm expecting this game to go down to the clip of a 35-21 type game. Sorry, Titans fans. I think that's huge not having Derrick Henry there. I think that's going to make a big, big difference in what you can do. And I don't think the Rams are going to respect what Adrian Peterson brings to the table. And I don't know if you're going to be able to slow down that pass rush of Aaron Donald and Leonard Floyd and Von Miller. Yeah, I said that right. Von Miller went to Hollywood at the trade deadline. So that's something to keep an eye on. Now, I want to thank you all for your time. Make sure you head over to the Vipers Network here if you're listening to this podcast. Hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, and make sure to hit me up on Twitter at MattDonnellyFF. And if you want more stats and facts, head over to fantasypoints.com, enter promo code 21Vipers10, and get 10% off your subscription today. That said, we'll see you next time. Take care.